welcome to Gardener's World. The grass borders have been really good all spring and early summer, but with the change in the weather, and we've had a lot of wind and rain here, they're getting a bit lush. When things get lush, they tend to get floppy because the growth is soft, and then they flop all over each other and need some staking and supporting. You can see this teasel, which has been lying on its side and of course wants to grow up like that. I lift it up and it's curved round, but that will straighten up, and it's one of those very prickly plants, and it's hiding one of the miscanthus that I planted this time last year. And what miscanthus does is give you that structure and architecture. You can see that this miscanthus is a giant grass. This is about 7 foot tall, and it has got another couple of feet to grow before summer is out. And the great thing about miscanthus, and there are many different cultivars and varieties to choose from, is that they are really forgiving and adaptable. They will grow in most soils, in most situations, and they never need staking. And that means you can use them as structure. And then you have the softer grasses that can weave around them, and you add to that flowers that can drift and flow in amongst the grasses. You can achieve that slightly ethereal effect at this time of year that you can't do with normal herbaceous plants. And then, of course, when we get to autumn and even winter, they have their own special beauty because they have fantastic autumnal colour. On today's programme, we meet an extraordinary young man who's packed his flat with more than 1,400 houseplants.
It all started when my grandmother gave me a spider plant cutting when I was 13 years old, and since then my appreciation has pretty much spiralled out of control.
There's another chance to join Nick as he celebrates one of the star climbers of the Midsummer Garden, the wonderful Clematis.
Compared to their spring flowering counterparts, Group 2 Clematis tend to have larger flowers, and they'll often repeat flower twice in the season. They really are the show-offs of the Clematis world.
And I will be sowing basil and harvesting gooseberries. One of our annual rituals here is that I harvest my first potatoes around the time of my birthday. This whole bed is a variety called Red Duke of York, which is a first early. I've grown them many times. However, I don't know if this is a good year or a bad year, if they're embarrassingly small and few and far between, or we've got a nice crop. So, I had better find out. And the only way to do that really is to gently put a fork in and hope you won't spear too many of the tubers, and gently lift it up. Now that is the seed potato. That is the potato that I planted, and very often it's rotten when you pull them up. So don't worry if the seed potato is slimy and horrible. It's nothing going wrong at all. It's simply done its job, and now it's finished and it's rotting away. Let's have a rummage. There you are. Look. Nice spuds. Now, a good rule of thumb when harvesting potatoes is to go by how long they've been in the ground. These were put in the ground on the 10th of April, and 90 days is the rule of thumb for first earlies. 100 days for second earlies, and 120 days, i.e. 4 months, for main crop. Now, as well as first earlies, I've got a bag here of main crop, because you can grow potatoes in any container that will hold soil. You can grow them in a dustbin perfectly well, as long as there's drainage. This is a variety called pink fir apple. The pink is the same, but they're a very different shape. They're sausage shape and slightly lumpy and ridged, and they're very waxy. And all that needs to happen to these for the moment is just to earth them up a bit. Just get some compost and top up around them. It'll give more room for tubers to form in, and also mean that those that do form will be kept dark. It's really important that tubers tubers, as they develop, are not exposed to light, because if they are, they will turn green and that stimulates a poison and you can't eat them. So I will add more compost to these in about 3 weeks' time, keep them very well watered, a feed of liquid seaweed once a week, and they will be ready to harvest at the beginning of October. Now, last year, Nick was celebrating the joys of the large flowered clematis, which are at their best at the peak of summer.
This garden is packed with over 230 clematis from across all three groups. But I'm here today to look at the summer flowering Group 2 clematis. Compared to their spring flowering counterparts, Group 2 clematis tend to have larger flowers, they're usually more compact, and they'll often repeat flower twice in the season. They really are the show-offs of the clematis world. While Group 1 clematis flower from February to May, Group 2 produce their main flush of flowers in May and June, and again, with a little help, later in summer. Clematis are well known for having quite specific cultural requirements. They generally like to have their tops up in the light, but the key bit is that their roots are cool and damp and shady. Now, that might suggest to you that you can't grow them in pots, but actually, if you get a large enough pot, you can easily get away with it. So something of this scale works really well. Now, of course, you need to make sure it stays very damp and keep it really well fed. Now, this is a particularly beautiful clematis. It's called Viva Polonia. It's got that lovely quality to it, very, very pale centre, which really makes it pop. If you look further down the plant, it's doing something quite interesting here. On this outer structure, it's starting to turn green, almost leaf-like. Let me explain why that is. So if you take a typical flower, say a rose, you've got very distinct floral structures. Around the outside here, you've got the sepals, which form the bud or hold the petals up, and the petals in the centre. When botanists can't differentiate floral parts between being a sepal or a petal, they call it a tepal. And so what you see on clematis are a series of tepals. They're not petals at all. They're quite different, and that's why they can revert and take on these green tones. They really are fascinating plants. This beauty is Clematis Bees Jubilee, and it really takes me back to when I was 16. I used to grow it in the nursery there, and hundreds of them I remember having to prise apart, so it's a really vigorous plant. Now, it first appeared in 1958, and it's got an Award of Garden Merit, so that means it's tried, tested, and a good, healthy plant. What's lovely about it is you've got this beautiful, deeper tone through the centre of the tepal, which makes it very, very distinct. Now, it flowers for about 6 weeks in midsummer, and then it will repeat again in the autumn and around September time, so it gives you really... Just noticed a lovely idea in this garden tucked away behind me, and it's one of the best ways to make the most of the quality of Group 2 clematis. So there's a Rosa Graham Thomas at the back there. It's quite a large rose, and it's almost taken on climber qualities. And what happens with so many of the big climbing roses is they tend to have bare bases, stems with no foliage and no flowers. But by using a Group 2 under there, it's come up to about 2 metres, totally covered those ugly stems, and it's got the added bonus that those beautiful flowers of the clematis associate fantastically with the rose. So it's a real double win.
Group 2 clematis are certainly the most dramatic flowers that any clematis produces. And the other advantage is that you can be fairly relaxed about pruning them, because you can just leave them alone and they will flower strongly, certainly in early summer. The big downside of the Group 2 clematis, more than any other, is that they are prone to clematis wilt. and you notice it, the tips of the plant will start to look as though they're dying. And the whole plant, within a day or two, can completely shrivel up and die back. And it looks absolutely awful. But if you cut it down to the ground, then it will regrow, and the regrowth will be completely healthy. Now, group 3 clematis are now really beginning to take over, and these are the ones you cut down to the ground in early spring. There's masses of growth, and then masses of flowers, and they will go on, some of them, until the first frost. And they are pretty much trouble-free, but not completely. I've got an example here. Have a look at this. This is a clematis called Madame Julia Corriva, and it has been growing here for about 10 years completely healthily. But you can see there is dieback, and it's not Clematis Wilt for 2 reasons. The first is that group 3 clematis hardly ever get it. And 2, it's not dying back from the top, because you can see the top growth is actually fine. It's dying back from the bottom. And we've hardly ever had this before, and we've got it on about 4 or 5 of our clematis. And I think that it's because this year is exceptional. We had an incredibly wet winter, being too dry. And just as they were putting on most growth, we had one of the driest springs on record. So this, which is about a 10-year-old plant, was stressed for months on end, and so it's in trouble. However, I'm going to treat this exactly as you do Clematis Wilt. I'm going to cut right back to the ground, and I will fully expect that to regrow healthily from the base. Now, I do want to plant a clematis, and I've got one that I want to put over on the other side of this path. Now this is Clematis Tandutika Helios. This is a group 3 late flowering clematis, and the Helios refers to these sun-like yellow flowers. And the seed heads are really beautiful because they're silky and white, and of course will last all winter long. Now you can see that I'm going down because the secret of planting all clematis is to plant it deeper than the depth that it is in the pot when you buy it. And that is about 3 inches deeper than it was in the pot. So when I backfill it, even some of the leaves will be under the ground. It means that if you cut back, there is good material underground from which new healthy growth can appear. Okay, let's backfill that. If your soil is sandy or chalky or very light, put in 6 inches of compost or manure. So if it's very hot and dry and the top 6 inches becomes baked, the roots are still getting moisture from deeper down in the soil. Before I backfill completely, I'm going to leave a depression because I want to fill it up with a whole can of water. The idea is that it will soak right down to the bottom of the planting hole so that all the roots are in contact with moist soil, and that will give it a really good start in life. And then I will mulch it thickly. The idea is not so much to feed it, but keep the roots cool. Now it's time to visit one of your gardens. And this time we're starting off in London, in a front garden, on a busy road.
Hi, my name's Alicia and welcome to our garden. We have a small garden on a road, so we have to think of imaginative ways to make it intimate, relaxing and versatile. And one way we do that is by using pots. I used some marigold seeds that I harvested from last year, and they've come up beautifully, along with some calendula and some lobelias that can trail over the side. This centerpiece is this really stunning silver dust that I got when it was this small. What's lovely about silver dust, especially in my region, is that it's evergreen. So this pot will continue through winter and will give me some really beautiful colour and structure. So one of the most relaxing things to add to your garden is a water feature. Now what we've done is we found a pot, we added some water, and we got some really beautiful stones from a local gardener. We added the stones after cleaning them with a toothbrush and purchased one of these. Now this is a solar powered fountain that you can get from any online retailer. Pop it in the water, and with a little bit of sun, you have a fountain. So if you only have a front garden for your outdoor space, why not try to be inventive and create something really special for you to spend your time in, even if it's beside a road?
It's so good to see the way that Alicia clearly loves her front garden, and to have a garden that looks great and you're proud of and that you share with other people, I think is wonderful. Now, I'm sowing here some green basil, and this is really because I love pesto. And the first stage is to put some compost into a seed tray and then scatter seeds thinly, because these will have to be pricked out and grown on in either individual plugs or pots. It is really important to realise that what you're trying to do is raise individual large plants. You get much more basil and much bigger leaves and better flavour if the plant is really quite substantial. They can be that tall and that wide. They're not little plants. And you can grow them outside perfectly well. But if you've got a greenhouse or a cold frame, then so much the better. I've planted some under cover and some outside, exactly the same lot from the same packet of seed. The difference is really dramatic. Just cover them up very lightly, like that. Press them down so they're in good contact with the compost. I will water that well and put it somewhere hot. In fact, it'll be on a heated mat in the greenhouse to germinate. If you haven't got that, then a windowsill is fine. But keep them warm, keep them well watered, and then as soon as true leaves appear, we can prick the garden at all. Then the plants you're going to grow will have to be house plants. But that needn't limit the range or scope of your horticultural imagination.
My name is Joe Bagley, I'm 20 years old and I live with 1,400 houseplants in my 12 by 6 metre apartment. It all started when my grandmother gave me a spider plant cutting when I was 13 years old. My appreciation for nature has pretty much spiralled out of control. I don't have much furniture, so upstairs all I have is a bed and a bedside table. When people who have never seen this place come in, I see their expression on their face, and it is quite fantastic going from a typical domestic household with a couple of plants on a table or in the corner to quite literally having to brush past the foliage to get in between the rooms. I like the idea of living how nature lives and nature almost controlling how I live. So having all these plants that require cooler environments, and I live in that environment too, I feel more at ease and a bit more natural, and especially in this day and age where we have so much technology, we're distancing ourselves from nature. With so many plants that are all going through different stages of their life all at once is a fantastic way to highlight the circle of life. Now in this particular room, it has one of the most amount of plants in, and quite interesting plants too. So at the end here, I've got an Oxalis Triangularis. So the crimson purple looking leaves are beautiful, especially the triangular shaped foliage. Now these actually move and they're called nictinastic responses. So in the day they open up and it looks a little bit like a satellite dish, and at night it will shut and it will form an umbrella type shaped leaf. So the one next door to me here is an asparagus fern. And this, when I first got it, only had a couple of fronds, a couple of leaves, and since then it has just exploded in foliage. Now, at this moment, I've got lots of little new stems. Some of them are about 2 metres. These are pretty easy to look after. You just have to make sure you don't underwater it because they'll start to drop. And that's what one of the most common issues with owners are. So at the bottom here, I've got an umbrella tree. Now these provide a palmaceous, oval-shaped leaves, which can really change the way a room looks, especially because of the contrast and the dark textures of this leaf compared to the white wall, for example. It's a beautiful plant to have in the house, very easy to look after as well, provide a very small amount of direct sun and make sure that the soil's third dries out in between waters. I've always said that the best way that you can get experience is having the plant yourself and going through trial and error. So what I do is I have this plant, I potentially reduce the temperature or I underwater it slightly just to see how it behaves. And learning about a plant that you physically have is by far the best way that you can learn from indoor gardening. This plant is called Epiprenum pictum agreus and is commonly known as devil's ivy. This particular specimen grows around 40 centimetres a year and requires very little cultivation. I water it once a week just to keep it on the moist side. However, if you do forget, this is also very forgiving. I keep this plant attached to the wall via sticky pad hooks. I don't use nails because I don't want to drill holes in the wall. The longest vine on this specimen is around 6 to 7 metres and it coils itself around the wall and it's actually growing over the wall into the shower now. I see these plants around me as almost like children. Now, of course, most of them don't move, so they grow very slowly. But when you think back and go, actually, from this photo a year ago, or whenever it will be taken, to how it's grown, it does fortify for me how much all of these plants are continually growing, and especially having this many, everything is growing 24/7. You know, how the plants interact with its environment, growing towards the light and producing and investing in new leaves from its energy. I regularly take leaf cuttings because it's quite a fun thing to do. I get the leaf, which is usually around half of the way down from the plant, and that's because it's usually larger with a bit more stored energy. Now I put these leaves on moist soil for about 2 weeks just to kickstart the rooting period off. Now once the roots start upwards, and that will get the roots and the new little foliar buds to develop really quickly. Now from a leaf to an actual small specimen, it'll take up to a year for me. But in general, it's a very quick and easy process. It's good to be different and live in a different way that normal people do, because living with this many plants, I see this as completely normal. My dream in the future is to have a garden conservatory, and I will use this as an extra lounge, and I'll have metre-tall plants with, bulbed fairy lights just to give a lovely, almost a garden atmosphere, but in the comfort of your own home. And not only that, but when it does rain, you will not only be surrounded by low foliage, but you'll also have the pitter-patter of the rain to really reinforce nature at its finest. And for me, the sound of rain beats music any day of the week.
Here, Nelly, bring it here. Come on, I'm up here. Good girl, well done. Now don't disappear now. Bring it to me. There's a good girl. Thank you. What fabulous plants. I've been growing these gooseberries for the last 3 years now, so this is the 3rd season. And they produced good gooseberries last year. I was saying that now, Harry. Good gooseberries. And they've been even better this year. In fact, it is a really good year for soft fruit. And now it's time to harvest them. And they come away pretty easily by pulling them off with your fingers, but it's better really to snip them if you can. Gooseberries are so forgiving. You can grow gooseberries in shade, you can grow them in sun, they really are not fussy about soil. In fact, arguably, the poorer soil, you get better gooseberries. If you grow them in too rich conditions, you get a lot of foliage and not so much fruit. And I'm growing them here as cordons. So each individual plant is grown at an angle, slanted up, and that means you can grow a lot of fruit in a very, very limited space. And gooseberries grow on old wood. So you can see there's no fruit on this year's growth. And it is amazing how much will come off this one small plant. Once you've picked the fruit, it's time to prune them. July is the perfect time to summer prune soft fruit like gooseberry. This to be a great broad bush, which is what it's trying to be. We want to keep it as a cordon. So I can reduce that down to about 1/3 of its length. And they are so spiky. What I'm removing now is the lush new growth from this year. And what's left behind will bear next year's fruit. Now, gooseberries are tough plants and don't really need feeding too much. You can let them do their own thing. But if you do feed them, homemade comfrey feed is ideal for that. However, there is one drawback, that it can stink. Or at least, I thought it always did. But we've had a film from a viewer in Ireland that shows there is another way.
Welcome to our garden in Rathcoole, County Cork. I'd love to share with you how I make comfrey liquid without the smell. Firstly, you just need a bin, rubbish bin with a hole, just a bucket to contain the comfrey liquid in. This is comfrey leaves that I've just chopped up. And it's nice and small, you know, about that size. You just fill your bin until you're about 3/4 ways up. Get a lid of an old drum and place that on top. And then get some weight. I've got a bucket with half a concrete block in it, and that crushes down on the leaves, makes the liquid quicker, and then cover it. Keep checking on it. It may take 2 or 3 weeks before the liquid comes. As soon as comfrey liquid appears in the bucket here below, no matter how small, if it's only a few teaspoons, get an old container and store it in it straight away. Because if you don't, it will evaporate. All your hard work gone. This is the consistency of the comfrey liquid. This is from the last batch I made. It's just like strong coffee without the smell. Then when you want to use it, use 1 part of the concentrated comfrey liquid to about 10 parts water. If you do make it, hope it's successful for you. And the best of luck with it.
Brewing into a good tea for plants is good news, so thanks very much, Evelyn. Now, I've taken the gooseberries back to the kitchen, and now I'm collecting fruit for a summer pudding. I've got red currants, and the other ingredient that you just must have in a summer pudding are black currants. Now, if you're used to growing soft fruit, you might think that red currants and black currants sound similar and grow in a similar way, but they don't. Red currants essentially grow exactly like gooseberries. They grow off older wood, they can grow in poor soil, they are tough plants that will last for ages. Black currants, and as I lift that net, the smell of the black currant, because you get that black curranty smell in the leaves, in the stems, as well as the fruit. They like rich soil, really rich soil, sunshine, And also, they produce their berries on first, second and third year growth, and thereafter they produce a lot less. And the plant becomes very woody and doesn't produce much fruit. So when you prune it, the idea is to renew each bush every 3 years. One way to do that is to cut a third of the oldest growth right down to the ground every year. And I'm often asked why we have upturned flower pots on top of the sticks that support the netting, and it's really easy. It's because then you can drape the netting over the top of these. That stops the netting sliding down, keeps it above the plant, keeps it nice and taut so birds can't get caught, and just works really well. Now, still to come on today's programme. There's another chance to join Arit on a visit she made to Birmingham, where she discovered how new and fresh planting along the city's canals is working wonders to attract wildlife. And when it comes to the mantra right plant, right place, the consideration of water must be high on the list. And climate change is obviously making that situation worse. So we paid a visit to the garden of an RHS water management specialist.
I'm Janet Manning, and I used to work in the water industry, but I've been a gardener all my life. This garden is actually on a 30-degree south-facing slope. It used to be a quarry, so it had no soil of its own. It was on bare rock, so it really isn't the best place to think about putting a garden. I also have to think really carefully about the plant choice. There are some things that I really can't put on a south-facing slope, like hydrangeas. They would hate it. They would just wilt on a day like this. Easy to turn on the tap, and yet we don't appreciate it as much as we should do, and we won't do, I don't think, until we run out. A hose can use as much water in an hour as a family of 4 might use in 2 days under normal circumstances. I don't want to waste any resources in my garden, and as such, then I don't use any tap water that hasn't already been used for something else. I've actually got 11 water butts. It's surprising how much water you can collect when it does start raining. With the weather we've had recently, it's been so dry. First thing I did was cleared out my garage, found an extra dustbin, which was ancient, and thought, right, I'm going to have that for water. And then when they all fill up, we just transfer it into the trug, so we're not letting anything go. I do like to keep the tops open on the water butt, but you do risk then drowning some wildlife. So I've just floated a flower pot in the water. It just sits under the surface so that the bees can just sit on there, dry their wings out and fly away. When we shower, we take the bucket in the shower with us. It's surprising how much you can collect, and we use that to water the plants. My teenage children do think that Mum's a bit crazy, but actually I think they're beginning to realise that we all need to be thinking of different ways of changing our lifestyles. I've got a slight problem with my guttering on my garage. Sometimes it leaks, so I'm not going to waste it. I've got a bucket strategically placed to catch that. So this is my fastest filling water butt here. So it's the whole half of the house here that drains into this water butt. And it does that using one of these rainwater diverter kits. And I've got one here. Normally when the water butt is filling, then the water hits the sides, around this little outer rim, and then down the pipe and into the water butt. And then once the water butt's full up, the water will spill over the top of that little weir inside and carry on down through the downpipe and then soak away. And I can take the water out of the tap, or an easier way is I can create a siphon, which means that I don't have to carry the water. Open that so that the air can get in, and then I pop that into my water butt so that the hose is filling up with water and the air is coming out the end. Once I've popped it all the way in, I can then close off the end to trap the water. Then the level in my water butt, the water will flow and I can water my plants without needing to waste a drop. What I do with my containers is just give them 10% of the volume of the container every day. They never get really wet, they never get really dry, but they tend to have an even amount of moisture every day. There isn't any water to see here, but this is a really important area for making sure that the rest of my garden uses the minimum amount of water that we need. I make all my own compost. The really good thing about it is that it's the bacteria and the fungi that live in the soil that do all the decomposition for you. So we're not only watering the plants, we're actually watering to keep all those microorganisms alive, because then they produce all the bacterial poo, and all of that sticky substance that they're excreting then helps to form those crumb structures within the soil. Once you've got the crumb structure, then you've got air spaces between them. And when you've got air spaces and it rains, they all fill up like little miniature reservoirs. So you can actually capture more rain by adding organic matter to your soil, as well as providing the nutrients to your plants. We had a really big downpour exactly a week ago. It hasn't had any water since then, and it's been facing due south. 30 degrees heat yesterday, and if we look under here, you can see that this is still moist. So it's a great way of saving water for your plants. The best way to water a plant is to get the water to the roots. If the water goes anywhere else, it's of no use to the plant whatsoever. And allowing the water to run out the bottom of the pot and away, well, all you're going to do is take away all those soluble nutrients that the plant needs to grow, and they're going to wash out the bottom of the pot with the wasted water. So the best way to water is to just slow the flow. I can show you how to turn an ordinary terracotta pot into a self-watering container. It'll not only help you save water, but it'll also mean that the plant has water available to it when it wants it. So all you need is an old compost bag, and this is going to be a waterproof lining that sits in the bottom of the pot. Just tuck it down in, but make sure these edges are up, because any excess is going to go down the outside of the bag and out through the normal drain hole. So you'll know when you've filled it up still, because you'll still see water come through. I don't want the two to come together. So these pots, I'm just going to put upside down into the reservoir, and that's going to help hold the soil and form a structure of my reservoir. But this one is going to go up the right way round. Then I also need a way of getting the water into the reservoir. So I've got a spare piece of downpipe from my guttering, and that's just going to tuck down in between the pots. Then what you need next is something that's going to allow the water to drain through. So this is actually a piece of dumpy bag where you've had soil or compost delivered in a large amount. But if you haven't got one of these, you could use an old cotton t-shirt. That would actually work. Push that right down in to that upright pot, and then all the edges can get tucked in down the side. And so what you can see now is a little pocket where I'm going to fill it with soil, but that's actually going to be sat in the water. So the next thing we need to do is fill it with compost. The important thing is that we've got some in that little pot that's the right way up. That is actually going to act as your wick. So that's going to get really saturated with water and provide that wicking action that brings the water up out of the reservoir and into the compost above. Cucumbers do quite well in this sort of pot because they do tend to wilt quite easily if you don't get the watering right. I know, because I tested it, that this will take 5 litres of water. So I know I should be able to put all of this water down the pipe, and you won't see any of it coming out from the saucer. There we go. The only last little bit that it really needs, I do this with all my containers, is add a mulch. That helps to insulate the roots, to reduce the evaporation from the surface. And there you have a self-watering cucumber. I would say just think twice about that hose pipe. We all need the water to wash our hands right now as well. And just surprise yourself at how little water you actually need to get a really good garden growing.
We never water the beds here at Longmeadow, and I've yet to try having a shower with a bucket. Maybe that pleasure awaits me. Now here in the spring garden, we have extremes of wet, because in winter this floods right up to about where I am now. But since then, it's been really dry. And as the trees put on leaf and the plants grow, they suck up all the moisture. So by now, it is bone dry, and this is classic dry shade. But that doesn't mean to say that you can't have plants that look good in summer as well as spring. These are Actea Brunette, and it develops lovely chocolatey foliage throughout the whole of spring and summer. And then later on in the year, September or even October, it has these great racemes of white flower, and they in turn are followed by berries which can be black, red or even sometimes white. These berries are poisonous, by the way, so I always cut off the flower head before they fall. Now it's not something that I plant as a clump, so if I place one there like that, because this will grow up and be about 4 foot tall with the plumes of flower reaching up to 5 foot, so really quite dramatic. This is Jillenia Trifoliata, and I'm going to make a little group of these because I want a strong clump. And herbaceous perennial, so it will die back and then the bulbs can come through it in spring, and then this will grow back up in summer. You can see it's got these lovely stars of flower borne on bouncing, swaying stems and these delicate leaves. Many woodland plants have evolved to cope with drought because they grow amongst the roots of trees. And there you are, you can see. Dry as dust. So we'll put this in. When I finish this planting, I will give them a really good soak, and it is essential that even if a plant thrives in dry shade, when you first plant it, soak it well. And then after you've done that, keep it watered for the rest of that growing season. Containers, which actually are nearly all old cattle troughs, it means that we do have a generous amount, and we don't need to use a hose pipe for this sort of thing. And then having watered those, I'm going to mulch them. If I put this round these plants good and thick, that will keep the water in, and the worms will work it into the soil and create the perfect growing conditions for these kind of plants. Now, it's always good to receive films from viewers' gardens around the world, and we've received one from Europe which actually relates to this because it concerns an area of the garden that seems completely hostile to any kind of plant.
Hello, and welcome to my garden here in Denmark. My name is Peter, and what I'd like to share is how inspiration from Gardener's World has helped me cure one of the biggest gardening headaches I've had since I started making this garden 3 years ago, and it is this place right here. Now, the reason for my headache is that this particular spot is right on top of an old world that's been sealed off by a lid of reinforced concrete. It's shallow and it's very fast draining. I just never thought we'd be able to have a border here. I've chosen compost that has clay pellets added, which will then absorb the water and then release it as needed. Obviously, it's not a silver bullet, so I'll still have to choose drought-tolerant plants. And now to the fun part. For coherence, I've chosen to use a few plants I already have in this part of the garden, but I'll be pairing them with a few new additions to keep things interesting. Euphorbia wolfenii and flowers with acid green orbs from the earliest spring all the way through midsummer. Nepeta is also happy in fast-draining soil and provides nice colorful spires and fragrant foliage. And Sedum matrona should be a nice contrast to some of the softer perennials here. Project done. Well done. I think all that's left to do now is water them in and hope for the best.
It is extraordinary how if you get the right plant in the right place, that old mantra again, how they can thrive in what seems to be completely inhospitable conditions. Well, what I'd love to do is see what it looks like in a year's time. So send us another film for lily beetle. They're bright red and easy to see, but the larvae, which are smaller and much harder to see, do the damage. And they do eat the flower buds, but these have come through almost unscathed. And they are filling the Paradise Garden with their incredible, voluptuous fragrance. Now, I don't suppose many of us think of Birmingham as being a hub of wildlife, but Eric went there to visit a project that is using the waterways in the city to create wildlife corridors that spread right through it.